Why did Satan enter the body of the serpent and hide himself therein? Because he knew that his appearance was foul, and that if Eve saw his form, she would betake herself to flight straightway before him. Now, the man who wished to teach the Greek language to a bird. All right, so now we're getting a little analogy. All right, so this is a famous story from the ancient world about a man who taught a parrot to speak Greek. Okay, so this is what's being referenced. Now, the bird that can learn the speech of man is called the parrot. First bringeth forth a large mirror and placeth it between himself and the bird. He then beginneth to talk to the bird, and immediately the parrot heareth the voice of the man. It turneth round, and when it seeth its own form reflected in the mirror, it becometh pleased straightway, because it imagineth that a fellow parrot is talking to it.
Oh, yeah.
Then it inclineth its ear with pleasure, and listeneth to the words of the man who is talking to it, and becometh eager to learn and to speak Greek. I have never taught a parrot Greek. I cannot tell you if this works, but this is like an ancient kind of fable. All right. In this manner, that is, with the object of making Eve believe that it was the serpent that spoke to her, did Satan enter and dwell in the serpent, and he watched for the opportunity. And when he saw Eve by herself, he called her by her name. And when she turned round towards him, she saw her own form reflected in him. I told you guys the mirror thing was going to come up. And she talked to him, and Satan led her astray with his lying words, because the nature of woman is soft or yielding. All right. So
that's amazing. That means that she heard it from herself.
What is the witch's, I'm going to do a little symbolic world plug here. What is the witch's first gift to Snow White?
What is it? The belt, right?
Okay. What is one of the witches? I actually don't remember the order, but was one of the witch's gifts to Snow White before the apple?
There's a corset and a comb.
There's also a mirror in some versions. Do we have a mirror?
Not in my version.
No, dang, Jonathan.
But it makes sense that there would be a mirror, because that's obviously, it's all about that. It's all about
all
vanity.
These things, right? The belt, the comb, and so on. These all have to do with vanity. I should know the book that we published, which I have actually right here next to me. But I also, there's like 40 versions of Snow White, by the way, you guys.
There's so much Snow White.
And the worst version, by the way, in case anybody's wondering, is the Italian version of Snow White, in which the story proceeds like you would expect right up till when she moves in with the dwarves, and then the townspeople hear that Snow White is shacking up with like a bunch of guys in a cabin in the woods, and so they come and they burn the house down and they kill Snow White and all the dwarves, and that's the end of the story. That's the obvious moral to the story, I guess. But that is one of the versions. So just by the way, when everybody's like, well, that's not the official version of Snow White, like the Brothers Grimm did not write these stories. I don't know how you think this worked, but anyway, okay, all right, sorry.
Okay, back to the mirror. So she hears it from herself.
So she hears the temptation from herself.
That's beautiful, yeah.
Like, which, by the way, sort of implies that the serpent is kind of like mirrored or shimmering again, by the way, which is quite interesting. And when Eve heard from him concerning that tree, straight away she ran quickly to it. She plucked the fruit of disobedience from the tree of transgression of the command, and she ate. And immediately she found herself stripped naked, and she saw the hatefulness of her shame, and she ran away naked and hid herself in another tree and covered her nakedness with the leaves thereof. And she cried out to Adam, and he came to her, and she handed him some of the fruit which she had eaten, and he also ate thereof. And when he had eaten it, he also became naked, and he and Eve made girdles for their loins of the leaves of the fig trees, and they were arrayed in these girdles of ignominy for 3 hours. At midday, they received their sentence of doom. And please brace yourself for this, Jonathan, because I will need help. All right, here we go. God made for them tunics of skin, which was stripped from the trees.
Oh.
That is to say, of the bark of the trees, because the trees that were in paradise had soft barks, and they were softer than the byssus and the silk wherefrom the garments worn by kings were made. And God dressed them in the soft skin, which was thus spread over a body of infirmities.
Wow, this is the very first time that I hear something like this, and so they're made out of the bark of the tree. So I've seen it in Africa. The pygmies, for example, wear what we call bark cloth, which is basically like bark that has been stamped down and made to be flexible, and they wear it over their loins. So this exists for sure.
Yeah, and the focus still here is like their body of infirmities. That is, something has changed about their bodies. But it's interesting here obviously what I would have been told growing up is like God killed an animal
and
then
gave them
dressed
the
them in
garments
its
of animal
skins.
skins. That's definitely the tradition that is the most known.
Yeah.
But I kind of like this tradition. One of the things that I've intimated too is that there's this relation. If you think about the garden, you can often think of it only as a tree, because you have the tree of life, as the axis of the tree, and then you have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as the branches. You have the fig leaf and the leaves, and then you have the thorns, which are at the end the consequences of the fall. But the idea that the leaves were in some ways still too flexible, and that they needed something that was was tougher and harder, and then you use the periphery, like the actual periphery of the tree. I mean, it's very similar to the symbolism of the garments of skin. It's just that the garments of skin kind of extend that into the idea of death, which I think it's a more powerful image for sure.
Yeah. There's some interesting stuff here in the Ethiopian commentary tradition on this. For instance, okay, so the whole reason it's important that okay, there's a couple of things going on here which will kind of explain why they parse the story out in this way. One thing is that St. Ephrem is very clear in his hymns on paradise, and then also again in the commentaries on Genesis. There's this ancient tradition that obviously predates St. Ephrem, that there are no beasts in paradise.
Yeah.
So when the serpent enters the garden, when the serpent enters, so there's the garden of paradise, and then there's the rest of the world, right? So you can see how like all of the world is in paradise, but then within all the world is within Eden, but then within paradise itself, there's no beast. So Adam is created outside of paradise, and that is where he names the animals, and then it says the Lord placed him in a garden. Well, how does he do that? He does it through the fiery chariot, right?
Yeah, it brings them in.
So there's no beast in paradise. Paradise is made for man, right? In the same way that we don't like let animals in the church, right? And so then what?
There's a more elegant solution than the bark of a tree, though, which is the serpent skin. That's the most elegant solution.
Yes, get into your time machine, go back.
No, but there are traditions that the garments of skin were serpent skins.
I didn't know that. That's crazy. Oh, that's wild.
In Aronofsky, that's what they show in the Noah story.
Oh,
you know how Noah has this like skin, and
I never saw that movie. Yeah.
I know you should watch it. It's crazy, but you should watch it. But there are traditions about how it makes sense because the serpent sheds its skin, and therefore,
right. Yeah. No, I get that. Yeah.
And also because of like the skins of the Leviathan at the end of the world too. There's like a connection.
Right. Is there any connection to any graphic novels you might be working on there, John?
Yes, of course. Because there's like, obviously in God's Dog, the garments of skin are one of the most important plot, elements, which is that we see the garments of skin as the very first relic, or the very first kind of artificial thing that exists in the world, and therefore has all the power of civilization in it. And so we definitely go for this idea of the hairy garments in God's Dog.
So the explanation for why there's no the understanding that in this commentary tradition they are conceiving of, there are no and it is really based on a very close reading of Genesis. Okay, they're not just making this up, but this idea that the garden itself is made for man. There's no beast in the garden. So in order for Satan to get in, like he's got to get a beast and then sort of use it to enter the garden. And so this kind of explains some of the different details. So there are in the Ethiopian tradition, there's these ideas that, for instance, Satan is going around trying to find a beast that he can enter into paradise on, and it's not working. Like he applies to the elephant and the lion and the leopard, the hyena. They all turn him down. The wild boar actually tries to gore him. Go pigs! And then finally he goes to this. He goes to the serpent, which is described as maybe having sort of like two legs. It's described as the front part of which is like a camel's foal, if you think of like the head and the legs. And the creature agrees to help him, and then he gets on the serpent or possesses the serpent, and then is able to use it to get into paradise. And it also mentions here, obviously, in the Ethiopian tradition, the tree of life being the prototype for the cross. This is everywhere in the Christian tradition. I would just have to say Like that's just pretty much
for sure. The idea of the animals being outside of the garden and then some of the serpent coming in. What's amazing about that is that you already see the usurpation that the Satan has and that the devil has. So you see an act of usurpation in the very structure of the story, and so it's beautiful. It's also very elegant because it has this kind of it kind of exemplifies the fractal nature of it.